Hello, and welcome to the Creative Adventure Podcast, an artist's guide to modern freelancing. Welcome to the tavern today. My name is John Jagsney. I am your host in the tavern. Well, actually, there's another host. That's the old man. Who's the bartender who's serving up the beer and the mead and the stew. But you finished your quest for the day. Put down your sword. Put down your axe. Close your creative software. Procreate, ZBrush, After Effects, DaVinci Resolve, Blender, Cinema 4D, whatever you use, put it down. Let's take a journey and talk about how to get your first client as a freelancer. Now, before we get started, I want to first start with a short story. Imagine the sun is just beginning to rise as you arrive in the town. It was a long journey. Your feet are sore, your stomach is empty, but you are well equipped. You have your bow, you have your axe. This is what happened earlier in the day. And what awaits you is a path of adventure and discovery. You're realizing that you have so much potential as an artist. You want to try and take on the freelancing journey. You see little shops, little markets. You see someone at the end of the street, and they're asking for help, asking for someone to help them with something. You're curious. You walk up and you ask them, "Hey, well met, my friend. How can I? You seem like you're in need of something." This person, this woman tells you that their son has been taken by a werewolf, and they need someone to go slay the werewolf and bring their son back. She says she'll give anything, coin, just bring back her son. Now, if you're a good adventurer, you probably embark on this quest. Might need to do a little bit of research. What do we need to slay a werewolf? Might need some silver. Might need some bow and arrow things with silver heads or a dagger. Or you might want to go to the library of the town and learn a little bit more about this werewolf. See if there's some other weaknesses. Where does it live? There's many ways to start this quest, but this is your potential first quest. Now, unfortunately, the modern world and the modern day and age is not going to be so easy. You're not going to be able to find your first client as a freelance artist by just walking through the town and seeing someone who might need some help in slaying a werewolf. There's going to be sales, there's going to be marketing, there's going to be a lot of communication that's required to finding your first client. So, what I want to do is first think about if you're an existing freelancer. Have you had a client before, and like how have those been, and where did you get your first client? And if you've never had a freelance client before, what is the kind of client you want to work with? Think about the kind of work you want to be doing, how much you want to be working, etc. And then think about like what are you currently doing on how you're trying to get that first client. So think about that, and then when we come back from our short rest, I'm going to share with you how to actually get your first client, or how I got my first clients, and hopefully it'll inspire you to take some action. But with that said, why don't we take our first short rest? So, getting your first client is, let's just call them quest givers. And when we are getting our first client, it really does come down to three main principles that are beyond the artwork. Because let's be real, while we are creative people that want to make cool art, cool visuals, I make 3D sculpts and board game commercials and toy commercials and sometimes video games. I sometimes like just doing stuff for myself, but not every project is going to be like you're going to be hired by some studio and they're like, make whatever you want. You have complete creative control and creative freedom, and then here's money. Very rarely is it ever like that, where you as an artist are given absolute creative freedom. Instead, you're providing a service in the same way that if you're helping slay a werewolf that captured some poor mother's sons, you need to go slay that werewolf. Like, you don't get to choose what monster you slay. You've never slain a werewolf before. You got to figure that out. In the same way that as a freelance artist, you're going to be doing some stuff that you may not know how to do. And it really comes down to, like I said, three main ideas. The first is establishing trust. Establishing trust is super important because if someone's going to give you money to perform a service, they have to trust you. In the same way that when you walk into a restaurant, you typically expect a good meal to be served, ideally, or at least it's going to be cheap, that it's not going to be terrible. Like if you go into Taco Bell or something, like your expectations are set. But you trust Taco Bell in the same way that you trust, I don't know, a much nicer restaurant. Like, I don't know, I'm in Southern California. Sugarfish is a really decent, or it's pretty good, sushi place in Los Angeles. So expectations are there, but effectively, when you go into a restaurant, you trust that you're going to be provided a service and it's going to be of some quality. And when you work with your first client, you really just have to establish trust. And establishing trust can come in a lot of ways. Trust is, one, your communication skills. Do they trust that you communicate effectively? Does your current portfolio elicit trust from your potential client? Do you have the work that best serves your client? Let's say, for example, you're trying to get some work with a video game studio and all your work is doing, I don't know, food content, for example. And I've run into situations like this in the past where I've done a lot of like event videos and I've thrown pitches and tried to get other clients to hire me for things that I know I'm very well capable of, but things that the client needs is not directly in my portfolio. So they don't trust me to solve their problem. So your portfolio can affect how a client trusts you to do the work, or is it just the timing? Maybe you may not be as available as you want, and the client needs to trust that you can get the project done for them. And if this is your first client, I will confess, you're going to be fighting a little bit of an uphill battle trying to establish trust, because when you're just getting started, your portfolio might not be super hot. You might still be in school, so your schedule is a little bit booked up, etc. But if you can communicate effectively and promise and say what you're going to do, then you will be able to establish trust and hopefully get your first client. So with that, the second component of finding your first client is follow through. And as I was writing this section, I thought of some other words. The first was execution. There's a book, Never Split the Difference, by Chris Voss, and it's a book about negotiation. And in this book, he mentions that one of the best things you can do in negotiations is execution. Just do exactly what you're going to do. And execute upon it, whether you're going to be taking photos, you're making a painting, making a video, whatever it is, just execute it. But I felt execute was a little bit more intense, and there's more to just being a creative business owner, even though that term makes my skin crawl, doing art for money. There's more to it than just making the art. Follow through then comes down to, okay, it's not just executing the work. We also have to be accountable. Accountable is basically what we say we're going to do, we're going to do it. And this is one of the best pieces of advice I got from many mentors in my life, between working at board game companies all the way to doing some stuff for some of my gym clients where I've done some fitness content here and there. And being accountable is just like showing up on time when you say you're going to show up. Honestly, I personally believe that if you're on time, you're late. I always show up at least 5 to 10 minutes before things. I'm a little neurotic about it, to be completely honest, but that's a discussion for my therapist. I will sometimes show up 15 minutes early just so I can scope out things, especially if I'm doing photography. But being accountable for like your timing is very important. Showing up on time, responding to messages in a timely manner is another way to practice accountability. because if your client sends you a message on Monday and you don't get back to them on Friday without a reasonable explanation, or your client has if there's a sense of urgency on the message that your potential client sends and you don't get back to them, what that shows and signals to this potential client that you're not a priority to them. And effectively, when you're trying to make art for money, you're providing a service. And when you flag down a waiter at a restaurant, you hope that they come and help you out in a timely manner. So the reason why I didn't just use execution is it's not just about the artwork, and the reason why I didn't just say being accountable, because being accountable says like, oh yeah, like you can show up on time, but you also have to like follow through with the work. So follow through is the second component I like to consider when it comes to getting your first client. That's not only doing the work, but it's also about being accountable throughout the entire process. So let's just say straight up, I'm very fortunate to be in the situation I am as a freelance video creator, and there are a lot of clients who trust me now with their work, but I know so many artists who are so much better than I am, and in the most gentle and lovingly way possible towards some of the people who I know, while they know so much more about creative fields, they're so much better artists, they can sculpt better, etc. The difference is that like I'm very accountable towards my communication with my clients, and that whether my art is good or bad or objective, sometimes my clients prefer getting the stuff on time to the quality that was expected. And whenever I'm pitching on work, whenever you're just starting to pitch on work, it's like you establish the trust with your portfolio or the examples of what you can do, and then you follow through on that specifically. And honestly, I've never found a situation where delivering much better quality work but late is ever a good solution. Like, honestly, having worse work but delivered on time that meets it's a minimum viable product to the client, that's always going to be better. So follow through is super, super important when it comes to finding your first client. Lastly, the last component of finding your first client is overcoming fear of rejection. Now, if you've ever experienced a romantic breakup before, you'll know that it stings, it hurts a lot, and we never want to feel like that. Fortunately, being in the creative field, in making art for money, it's not going to sting as much, but there's still a component of it. You will probably, if you embark on this freelancing journey, will send tens of, if not hundreds of emails, maybe in a month, of just trying to get potential future work, whether it's through Instagram DMs, whether it's through email, going to networking events, etc. There will be situations where you're being rejected a lot, and it never feels good to feel rejected, especially when it comes to our art, because it can be a very personal thing for us. And ultimately, when you're creating work for a client, you're creating work to help them solve some sort of business problem or some sort of problem for them. And sure, maybe if you do like wedding videography or photography, you're kind of solving a problem, but really you're just making memories for those people, the bride and groom. But to an extent, that's a problem, because this problem you're solving is in the future they want to have those photos or that video. So all that being said, you're serving the client. You're not making something for yourself. Like, very rarely does someone go to a wedding and just take photos without like either most of the time you don't keep those photos for yourself. You share them with your friends and all that. So all that being said, when you create work for a client, you're helping them solve a problem. It's not just for yourself, and as such, sometimes there may not be a good fit. Let's just use an example. Let's say you go to a Dungeons and Dragons convention, and you meet a recruiter for some sort of D&D inspired game, and you're an illustrator, and all your work in your portfolio is a bunch of like Star Wars and Mass Effect and Star Trek or sci-fi related things. But you're at a Dungeons and Dragons convention and talking to an illustration recruiter. Yeah, you could probably do the D&D illustration, but that what you're showing is it's not a good fit. And in that moment, you may be getting rejected, but it's because that client doesn't trust that you can solve their problem. So there's going to be a lot of layers when it comes to overcoming fear of rejection, but that's just a part of being a modern freelancer, where you're going to be putting yourself out there a lot. And a lot of the time when it comes down to a situation where you are rejected, it's just moving on to the next one. If someone rejects you, there's nothing you can do about that situation. If you go back to the previous episode I mentioned on the let them theory, if someone rejects you in that moment, it's never ever going to be worth your effort and energy to dwell on something that you ultimately cannot control. What you can control is how you respond to that rejection. So for example, if you are rejected in a client scenario, whether you're in the pitch phase or you're just getting started, move on to the next one. You never can control how people are going to respond to you, but you can control that you're constantly going to be creating artists or creating art as an artist, and through doing that, that will signal to other potential clients that you might be worth hiring, that they might trust you to do the work for them. So, all that being said, if you are getting a lot of feelings of rejection, it is important to overcome that. And really, it comes down to securing your first client. Some people might say it's about being in the right place and right time, and I actually disagree with that notion. I disagree with the right place, right time notion because it comes back to the three principles I mentioned previously. If you don't build trust, whether it's through your portfolio or your communication, of course someone's not going to hire you. They don't trust you in that moment, and that's something you can learn from. Or if you potentially get past the portfolio review stage and past the first introduction stage, and then they reject you ultimately, your follow-through probably was not as good. So if you're faced with a dream project that maybe is beyond your skill set and your portfolio doesn't show that, that project wasn't ultimately right for you. And I'm typically not a very woo-woo person or a spiritual person, but as I have evolved as a freelancer over the, 10 years of just being a freelance video creator into 3D artist, into photographer, into many things, sometimes there are projects that come across your plate that is just not right for you at that moment. And ultimately, the energy that you put out into the universe, especially if you're an artist, if you're constantly making work and signaling to other people who could potentially hire you for work, if you're putting out the right kind of work and the right kind of energy, that's how you're going to attract the right kind of potential clients for you. So if you're just getting started and you're trying to swing above your weight class, as much as I hate to say it, it's going to be a little uncomfy for a while because you're going to get a lot of rejection. So maybe shooting and swinging within your weight class would be a better option. And ultimately, if you're just making constant work as an artist in the industry, eventually that's going to signal to potential clients that, like, hey, we can maybe trust this person. And then you communicate well enough, and then you potentially get hired. And then you follow through, and you give good work on time, to the degree of quality that they expected. Then you start building your freelance career. So, ultimately, if you put out positive energy into the world, the universe kind of has a way of just giving it back. So, all that being said, the three principles that I really like to think about when it comes to finding clients and building your first client is establishing trust, follow through, and overcoming fear of rejection. Now, I want to take a short rest, and when we come back, I'm going to share with you how I found some of my first clients as a freelancer. So some of my favorite freelancers in TV, RPGs, games has been The Mandalorian, Geralt of Rivia. I always play a rogue in World of Warcraft, and I always loved the idea of just like being a bounty hunter, mercenary sort of thing. I always like to be the ethical rogue. Like I never ever want to do like super shady things or like I don't want to. I'm not dark side. I don't like the dark side, but I do things for money as a rogue sort of thing. That's just how I've always played World of Warcraft, and I remember very early on in Wrath of the Lich King in 2007. That's an expansion in World of Warcraft. I used to run 3 Drake Sartharian runs. Now, I know I'm speaking gibberish to some of you, but basically there was this dungeon where if you did this boss fight that had 3 dragons in it, it's much harder, but you get a mount at the end of it. And I would set up these groups and run these groups, and I built a little system so I could effectively sell the mount. I would basically coordinate some of the best players I know, and then we'd be like, okay, who wants this mount? We'll guarantee you get it 100,000 gold, and then we would split it like 6 ways across some of the people who we brought to the raid, and it was a really good way for me to. I was effectively a freelancer on my server for a little while. Did this for a couple months and then just kind of died down. But I share this because effectively I provided a service and I created a scenario where people eventually trusted me to like help them get this mount. So that's the first example of like being I guess a freelancer of like, hey, I'm providing a service, I'm getting you this mount, and then now I have a lot of gold. Okay, great. What about actual doing art freelance things? So the first thing that I always recommend people do to get first new clients or uh, really maintain relationships with existing clients is spec work. Spec work, if you're not familiar with it, is basically doing work without pay to demonstrate to a client that you can best follow their brand. You can create work that is to some degree of quality, and it's effectively like I'm just gonna do something that is demonstrating that I can provide a good service to you. So examples of spec work that I've done. I've done free gym videos for clients early on. I've shot weddings for free, basically. I have done toy commercials for fun in my garage with my camera and a slider just because I want to be working in toys. And I remember one of my first early projects when I was going back to school in Cal State Long Beach for economics. My sister had a Canon T6i, and the company Cryptozoic Entertainment, they were trying to do some marketing for some of their games and trading cards. And I was making World of Warcraft videos on YouTube at the time, and I just volunteered to my friend Sarah, like, hey, let me just help you guys make a video. And then we did that, and it was not great, but I executed on it, and it was done. And her boss, Sarah's boss, liked it enough. Her boss's name is Erica. If you guys are listening, hi. And she was like, great, do you want to do a couple more for us? And ended up getting paid minimum wage for these. It was like super cheap, like $15 an hour. And this is back in like 2014, 2015, like a really long time ago. And I really liked that. And I was doing that while I was going to school. And I wasn't getting paid a whole lot, but it just enabled me practice. So the first example is I did this video for free. Granted, I got that experience, I got that opportunity because I was practicing some other video stuff on my own at the time. So if you're an artist, you're probably making some stuff for yourself. So being able to show that is important to help establish trust, like I said. And then you follow through and you do the thing. And eventually it turned into a more regular thing for me. Now, that was my very first experience of doing like actual paid video work. Since then, I've done more spec work for many different companies. I remember I was trying to apply to the company HyperX, previously owned by Kingston, and I did like a little video in my living room. And I remember being in the application process and in the job interview at the time, and they're like, wow, you really went above and beyond. Most people don't do like a spec commercial for us. But I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to do stuff. So unfortunately, spec work is generally free, but it's some of the best way to help signal and negotiate to a potential client that like, hey, I'm serious about this, and I'm gonna like give away some of my time and my energy to show you that I'm like really interested in this. So okay, what should you do about spec work? How can you start with it? Because it's very easy to like have these grandiose ideas. Like, let's say you want to work for like Blizzard, World of Warcraft. You want to make like a game cinematic. You can get way out of hand. So I have a couple rules when it comes to creating spec work. The first is, depending on your line of work, it should take ideally no more than 3 days. The first day is like coming up with an idea, some general like thought process around like what am I going to do, storyboarding, sketching, block out, etc. The second day is production. It should take you no more than a day to actually do the bulk of the work, whether it's filming, doing the inking and the coloring, etc. And then the third day is for post production. So I typically think about these things in video terms because I make a lot of videos and trailers. It's the post production day. That third day is for post production. And the reason why I say 3 days for spec work is because the fourth and fifth day is sending out emails, sending it out to people, or sharing it on social media. And that shouldn't take all day, but like sharing it with people. And then the fifth day is including it in your portfolio in some way. And that's like putting it on your website, putting it in a really neatly packaged way so that a potential client you can signal to them that, hey, I'm trustworthy. Look at this cool thing that I did. Now, when it comes to spec work, the last thing I will say is that it's important to, one, be extremely generous. Give it away. If you do something for a potential small brand, small client, etc., I really do recommend just giving it away. Send them the file, let them have it. Say, do whatever you want. If I can ever help you with anything else in the future, let me know. Don't even mention rates, don't even mention money. Just say like, I'm just giving this to you. And then when the discussion starts, maybe they'll bring up budget. If they ask something for free, again, you should say, oh, hey, sorry, I did this as a free thing, but I'm actually in the market I am a freelance artist. So if this is something you guys can allocate some budget for, then I would love to consider working with you guys more. And the reason why I made this spec work is so that we could start a long-lasting relationship. But if someone asks for free work after you've given someone more free work, like, first understand what they're looking for, what they're asking for, and like, hey, maybe it could be a good opportunity. So maybe doing another spec piece would be a good way to help leverage future relationships if it's for free. If maybe that person can offer you something that's a non-cash offer. Getting a little ahead of myself when it comes to spec work, but the first thing is like, just give it away, be generous without expecting anything in return, and just see what the other person does. Maybe it turns into something, maybe it doesn't. Now, I will confess that I've done some spec work that has turned into nothing, but I do a lot of YouTube videos as well. So the way I've leveraged spec work that has not turned into actual client work is I include it in my portfolio, which becomes better leverage for future work. Now, the reason why I'm so adamant about spec work is it's, in my opinion, the best way to get a conversation with a new potential client, new potential collaborator or artist, because it really just shows follow through. It shows that you can do stuff and you can do cool things. And like we as artists, while seeking validation through our work all the time is probably not good for mental health, and that's something that I'm working on still, it has been a great way to demonstrate to new clients the new ideas that I want to try, the new ways in which we could help level up some of their marketing content. And it's just been a good way to like flex my creative skills and also turn it into something that could potentially be something I'm paid for. Now, some of the best advice I got when I was visiting Texas. I was visiting Already Been Chewed and Barton Damer, the studio owner of Already Been Chewed. We were hanging out with him at his studio, and one of my friends, Thomas, asked him, like, do you ever do spec work or anything like that? And at his point in his career, I'm sure this is why he said it, but he said, no, because I want to get paid for the work that I do. So it's important that when you're an artist, you should first consider, like, what are you trying to do with the work that you're doing? And if you just want to make something a hobby, you just want to sketch, you want to just sculpt on your iPad, whatever you do, like, great. That is a great way for emotional release, mental relaxation, winding down, etc. But if you're actually a freelancer trying to make artwork for money, it's important to choose spec work or work that could ideally be leveraged in the most gentle and authentic way possible to help propel you to becoming a professional artist and creator. And I will say, like, I sometimes just bring my camera and film videos for my friends at events just for fun because I know it's my way of showing affection. But there's also other event videos that I make that like helps me like talk with some really cool people, which is super awesome. So it really just comes down to like whenever I do those things, I am trying to be as generous as I possibly can in those scenarios and just like show cool people that like, hey, I do cool stuff too. I just want to work on cool things with cool people. So that's really one of the benefits about making spec work. And I hope it doesn't come off as sleazy or weird, but like ultimately, I love what I do, and I hope that as you listen to this podcast, you really love what you do as well, and you can turn that into something that really brings you joy by being generous with other people. So, spec work out of the way. Next, the second most effective way I found to get my first client or future clients is word of mouth. And word of mouth is really just it's exactly as it sounds. Someone says that you did a good job and that you should hire them. And to be completely honest, that is how I've received most of my work as a freelancer. I've spoken with other freelancers, and that's how they get work as well. When you do good work, the reward for good work is more work. And effectively, when it comes to doing good work, if you do a good job for someone, they're likely going to recommend you. Like, have you ever been to Yelp or a restaurant review website and they're like, hey, uh, this restaurant, it's 5 stars. Great. You probably go there because it's reviewed pretty well. Now, all things considered, if you go to a Chinese restaurant and it's 3.5 stars, that's the sweet spot for a good Chinese restaurant because the food is good and it's authentic. But that's a Freddie Wong joke if you're familiar with TikTok. But most of the time when you're on Yelp and you're going to restaurants, the most effective way to understand if that restaurant is going to be good is look at the reviews, see what people are saying. And when it comes to doing freelance art, freelance work, when people say that you do a good job, they're likely going to recommend you, and then ideally you get more work from that. So for example, I have a friend who worked at the company Ultra Pro, and he recommended me to do some work with them for a while, and that turned into a really amazing contract with them for a really long time throughout most of COVID, and that was an amazing opportunity. And I'm still friends with the people who were working at Ultra Pro. They have since moved on, but as I've spoken with them, they've suggested my name to some of their other colleagues and collaborators, and really that just comes down to I did good work with them in the past. They like me in the future for whatever they're doing. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because you never know exactly who you're going to be working with in the future or who they are now. So it's so important to be as generous as you can, especially as a freelance artist. I like the whole spec work thing. This kind of comes back to it. Never ever be selective about, well, I mean, be a little selective, but like, just because someone may not have a whole lot of money, they don't signal that externally, like, just do good work for good people and good work for cool people. And hopefully it turns into something, or maybe it doesn't. But then, hey, you got to be generous in that moment. And, like, I go to the Ren Fair and take photos of my friends because I like doing it. So, without flexing my ego there, I hope this doesn't come off as that way. When it comes to word of mouth and being a freelancer and giving away work and making work for people, it's just about being good to work with, being really good at what you do. And if you're just getting started, that does come through time. But all this comes down to word of mouth is effectively building trust. You are building trust in other people to a point where they trust that their recommendation is going to be right for someone else. In the same way that when you go to that restaurant review on Yelp, you look at the 4-star reviews, and sometimes you look at the 1 stars just to see what their bad experience is. Ideally, you want the good reviews to only come from from good reviews from your friends about you. You want all the good reviews to be shared about you, and really that just comes down to building trust with so many people, and really just showing to the world that you're good at what you do, you can follow through on it, and you like doing it. So word of mouth, it generally comes if from like a close friend who needs help with work. And sometimes that might just be a situation where I'll do work for free for that friend. And it's just like, hey, can you recommend me to some other people in your network? And that's great, awesome. Because then you get to make cool stuff with your friend, and then you also get to maybe leverage that into a new future potential opportunity. So word of mouth is a great way to get started when it comes to finding your first client. But let's say maybe for example you live in a world or in a part of the world that doesn't have a whole lot of people that actually need your services. This is where the sales part comes in. And on social media, there's DMs. So we'll get to email in a second, but DMs I have found is actually the more effective way to find future work because you're directly communicating with people on Instagram and TikTok, etc. And effectively, you're reaching the people who are going to be posting your work. So if you're making like marketing content, granted, if you're trying to get work at a video game studio, go to conventions and talk to recruiters, etc. But cold DMs, it's a hard thing to do, but that's where the spec work comes in. If you give something away in that moment, like you post something on Instagram, you tag someone, etc., then what that can turn into is a conversation. And that's all it should turn into. Never ever expect work, never ever expect payment out of the gate. It's all about being as generous as possible. And maybe it turns into something. Let's say there's a brand that you like that you want to work with, and you do an illustration for them or something. Just like try it out, give it away. I remember pretty early on, I was trying to break into the motion graphics for metal concert space, and I actually was able to talk with some cool metal bands because I was just posting some random stuff on Instagram and they liked it. I will confess, I overbid that project. I just didn't know any better. I was like, oh yeah, 800 a day, when realistically I could have done whatever they were asking for like $100, and I would have been so happy because they would have posted it on their channel. And like I know, and I know that sounds super cheap, but like that was the budget that they had. They were a band just starting out, and on top of that, what I could have done what they were asking for in an hour. But I was like, oh, I'm gonna make $800 in 1 hour. It's like, no. I am all about making sure that your rates are paying you a livable wage, but it's also being reasonable, which we'll talk about in another future episode. But the whole cold DMing part is about being as generous as possible. So like if you just message a big brand, first off, a big brand may not respond to you because they might likely have the budget and the team to not need to hire out contractors directly through Instagram. They're probably working with an agency. So if you want to work with like, I don't know, Disney, Coca-Cola, NFL, whatever, that's you're not going to get work directly through Instagram unless you are like the best of the best and you already have a big following, etc. So working with smaller brands, like for example, if you have a dog and you like dogs and you're like a small niche dog food brand, go ahead and make something for them, make some content for them, and maybe it could turn into something, maybe it doesn't. Awesome, but they're a small brand, they need the help finding the right fit for the job and talking to the right people. So when you do that, give away something. But ultimately, like, cold DMs is a really useful tool to reach out to the people who may be hiring you as a freelance artist. Now, if you're trying to be on staff, talking to recruiters is a much better situation, and the cold DM just turns into cold conversations at conventions and stuff. I've done situations like this at NAB and GDC, and it's a little uncomfortable. We'll talk about communication in another episode, but really it's just putting yourself out there and being as generous as possible, so then you can establish trust and following through through your emails, timely manner, etc. Now, let's say you're so lucky as to get past the cold DM and turn into a hot conversation, an actual real conversation. We're just going to leave that joke there. A real conversation that could potentially turn into something. It's more about building relationships with people and seeing if it's going to be a good fit. So having virtual hangouts on Zoom, Google Meets, doing coffee with someone, The best advice that I got when it comes to those situations, if you're trying to find your first client, is never ask for work, never ask for anything, except ask about them. Ask about their wisdom, ask about their experience, because people love to share things about themselves. And when people share things about themselves, they love to talk about it. I love to talk about myself and my experience, which is why you're probably listening to this podcast, because to an extent, I do enjoy sharing some of the things that I've experienced in life and hopefully reduce the suffering that other people have to experience. But I know that I sometimes feel the ick when someone's like, "Give me a job. Do you have a job?" I'm just like, "I'm sorry, man. Like, what? Where did this conversation go?" So, uh, always asking for wisdom and advice about or asking about their experience is always going to be better than just like, "Do you have money?" So let's be real. Asking for an in-person meeting is time-consuming and challenging. A lot of people are super busy. So Zoom and Google Meets is typically where I like to hang out with people. And I have a rule for myself. I try and do a Google or Zoom meet with someone new at least once a week, just to keep up the conversation skills, the making friends skills. And online it's a little challenging, but just doing it over time does make it easier over time. So talking with someone is always going to be the best way to actually build rapport with people and establish trust. So a couple things that this will come into the communication episode later, but here are some questions I highly recommend asking when you're trying to build rapport with someone. I got this from a handful of books. One is 96 Ways to Talk to People. And the first is, how do you like to spend your time? Let me say that again. How do you like to spend your time? We'll elaborate that on that later, but it's just like, rather than just talking about work exclusively, like, what do you like to do outside of work? And people, it's so broad that people can answer however they want. They could be like, oh yeah, I'm a surfer, or oh, I like to paint, and then you learn more about them. Second question is, what are some of your favorite parts about your job? And then they can just, rather than talking about the boring parts, you're just like, hey, what's the good part about your day? People like talking about positive things. Like, that's just a fact. And the last question, I don't really ask this question all that much, but if you need to if you're at the point of the conversation where the first two questions didn't turn into a long-winded conversation, asking, tell me about how you got where you are today. And then people just like asking for their life story. So, all that being said, coffee dates is just reaching out to new people. That involves finding your first client, really just comes down to putting yourself out there. That's reaching out to new people, networking events, playing games with people, going to Magic the Gathering events, playing Dungeons and Dragons with people, because you never know how the kind of art you can make for someone in the future, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It's always just about being a constant creator and making stuff, and ideally serving people over time. Now, the last thing I want to say is that people say, like, do cold calls and cold DMs. And I personally have never had a lot of success with that through just straight email or like calling someone's cell phone. And I've actually heard some experiences from people who are not recruiters, who are like trying to get work, like people trying to get work from people who are not recruiters, those people who are thought to be recruiters but are not. They get really frustrated, like, why is this person calling me? Like, I don't have a job for you. So it's being really, really, I hate this word, but strategic about who you speak to, but like what you speak to them about, what you speak about with those people as well. Like sometimes people just want to make friends. Not everyone is going to be able to pay you for money or pay you for your work. Let's be real. And I will say that sending emails has been helpful sometimes, but like getting that in-person connection is always going to be so much better. So going to networking events like Comic-Con, WonderCon, NAB, and talking to the right people and then following up via email has always been more successful in actually getting a response back than just sending someone a blanket cold email. In the same way that like typically someone will respond to you via email if someone has recommended you to them, because then they know that like, hey, I trusted this person, you should trust them too. Like that conversation is so much easier to have. So all that being said,
for my career personally, I have not found a lot of success with cold DMs and hot DMs. And I know that I'm not the best artist in the world, but I do follow through with things. I'm certain there are some artists out there who have done a really good job just cold DMing people or cold emailing people. DMing is a little different, um, but cold emailing people, I've never really found anyone get like a really solid paying job from that. It's not worth ignoring, but I feel that making spec work and being loud about it is more valuable than just sending out 300 emails into the ether, into the internet. So, all that being said, that is how I achieved a lot of my uh, client work. It was through making free stuff very early on. I still make free stuff sometimes here and there to help with communication and word of mouth, and really just constantly being a creator. But really, finding your first client does come down to establishing trust, following through with all parts of the project, whether it's communication or execution of the work, and overcoming fear of rejection, because as a freelancer, you will feel a lot of rejection. But if you can get past that, I'm sure over time your career will grow into something awesome. Now, if you recall back to the beginning of this episode when we talked about the mother who was finding a freelancer or a warrior, rogue, a wizard to save her son from the werewolf, unfortunately, the real world is not as easy where quest givers will come to you or just be hanging out there. So really, it just comes down to putting yourself out there, putting out good work, and hopefully something will happen. So, all that being said, we're going to roll a dice today, and hopefully your next follow through or email or message or spec work will turn into something. We'll see. What is that? Rolling initiative? Because you're taking initiative on finding some work? Let's see. How's that going to go? That is a nat 20. Whatever your project is, I hope it goes really well, and I'm super stoked for you and for myself for rolling this nat 20. I hope that your next client project turns into something amazing. If you enjoyed the Creative Adventure podcast, I would love it if you could leave a comment, leave a review, hit me up on Instagram, let me know if this content is valuable to you so I can continue making content for my freelance, artistic, nerdy friends like myself. And until next time, may the freelance dice forever roll in your favor. Take care.